Good morning, Bitcoiners. The sun is up. Bitcoin's running. We're all good. I got my coffee. We can talk about the news. It's a big day. We're optimistic. Let's see if everything's working okay. This Rumble thing keeps being... Well, let's see. I don't know. I don't know if the Rumble's working, but we're going to find out. We're going to find out. Anyway, let's get on with things. So, it looks like Elon's purchase went through yesterday, today, his first days as CEO. I noticed, of course, a tremendous amount of fake news in the wake of him coming. And I want to show you just a few because we're going to get used to this, right? It's going to keep coming. What's up, Dex? Yeah, this is not going to stop, right? I foresee a massive amount of full frontal attack on Elon. Hey, a Bitcoiner's in charge of Twitter now, so we can expect it to come. So let's predict it and have a look. So did you know that Business Insider has all kinds of different magazines with a different focus? They don't publish them, they're just online things. But I noticed one yesterday. It's called the Military and Defense Insider. You know, it's a huge industry, so of course they have a beat. And they wrote a article yesterday, and the title was "Elon Musk floated his pro-Kremlin Ukraine peace plan at a private summit 10 days before tweeting about it," a report says. But whatever, the headline's fine. You got to go check out the picture. It's amazing. It's amazing. They chose the most sinister looking photo they could possibly come up with to put on the cover of this article. And I mean, it's like really like a villain, like a superhero villain. He looks kind of like the Penguin or like one of these Gotham inspired villains, right? He's like straight out of a comic book. He's got his tuxedo on, and it's a white tie tuxedo, so it's even more ridiculous, right? It's not a black tie tuxedo, it's a white tie tuxedo, so he's even more of a villain with it. So pretty funny. Now you get all these people saying, oh, what, you know, Elon, he's firing all, he fired the CEO yesterday, right? Parag was fired, right? So the CEO of Twitter, gone. And of course, we all saw a lot of those tweets, and people are talking about them even more. The text messages that went back and forth between them now that they're all public. And that was one of the ones that I put in the title today when he called it maximum amazing, that he wanted Twitter to be maximum amazing. And that was sort of just in that same conversation when he said to Parag, well, what have you done this week? When Parag was trying to explain to him how hard Parag's life was now, that Elon was tweeting and he had to go help people in the office and they were worried about their jobs and it was sad, and if only Elon would just do a normal business deal and everything would be fine, right? It didn't work that way. So Parag's out, and it looks like Elon's going for the CEO spot himself, which is pretty amazing. I think there's other people in the marketplace that could have done the job, but I think we'll have confidence that he's going to do his best, and we'll talk a bit about the letter he wrote to advertisers later in the show. But you know, an important thing. But it did bring up one of the big themes that I have for today. And oh yeah, let me just give that one other, you know, everyone, one more bit of fake news, and this is a hilarious reaction. So, you know, everyone's out there, what are we going to do? All these engineers getting fired. That was one of the big reactions, right? Like, how could he leave Twitter undefended? And David Berg, if you don't follow David Berg, Iowa Hawk blog, you got it. He's one of the funniest people out there, and he's taken a step back on Twitter just because of how crazy things were for him at one point. But here's his take on everyone complaining about engineers being let go, or just even the specter of the layoffs and how it might overlap with engineers. So here's what he says. I like the thing where people assume everybody working at Twitter is a computer science PhD slinging 5,000 lines of code daily with stacks of job offers for Silicon Valley headhunters, and not a small army of 27-year-old cat lady hall monitors. Small army of 27-year-old cat lady hall monitors. So now that the cat lady hall monitors are gone, our theme for the day is about anchor bias. Anchor bias. I don't know if it's the Rumble one, which I don't think is even working. Could be the. I don't know if it's the. Oh, there we go. Well, I think we're back. Anyway, that's fine. So, this anchor bias, right? What is it? Bias is when you are biased by the first thing you see, and it helps make a decision, and it implies further consequential choices that aren't really rational. It's one of those biases where you're not using your rational mind. And you see anchor bias regularly, especially when it comes to deals. Whenever you see like 3 options or packages to choose, and then one is pushed in front of you as the most savings or the best deal, Uber does this a lot, that's anchor bias, right? So they put one in front of you that says it's the best deal, even though it's probably more expensive in total dollars than something less expensive. But really, it's just this going off the first bit of information you have and making consequential decisions thereafter. And what it is it's a shortcut for the brain, because the brain doesn't like to use the whole rational side for every single decision it makes. It really does want to revert to shortcuts and easier processes to make decisions. So what we're seeing here, and the reason why I brought it up today, is because when you've got something like Twitter and the changes that are about to happen, you're about to see a bunch of people confronting information they have never seen, right? There's, in America anyway, millions of Democrats who don't know that Russia collusion was a hoax, that the Charlottesville fine people story was a hoax, that drinking bleach was a hoax, that there's a list of hoaxes that just goes on and on and on. The January 6th stuff is a hoax, right? People don't know the true account of things. And it goes the other way. There are people on the right who just don't know about the news. There's things that they never heard about because everyone's been living in these echo chambers for so long. Now, here's the problem. Here's the opportunity and the problem. The opportunity and the problem. The opportunity is when this gets shaken up to the extent that it may now with Twitter, right? That it may now with Twitter, people's minds become disoriented. And there's a few things that are latched onto in a period of intense disorientation. The worry, the risk, is that it's really the first thing that makes sense that people will latch onto. So if we do enter this world now where the news has become super discombobulated because people will be hearing about these hoaxes for the very first time in their life, right? The very first time in their life on both sides. Both echo chambers might just be smashed together now because the hall monitors are gone. And we don't have that further balkanization of social media any longer. We don't have everyone living in their own little bubbles, getting worse and worse and worse and more estranged from reality as they pull away from any amount of shared understanding of the world. So anchor bias comes in here in a big way, because once people are knocked off of this security, they're going to search for meaning and a way to make sense of the things around them. And the worry is that almost anything can take the place if it makes enough sense, if it offers relief from the symptoms of confusion that are brought on by this unmooring of Twitter. Then there is an opportunity now for all kinds of people to compete for those people's brains. Now, when you do have that anchor bias, there are other conditions that start to come into play, and you can use those to predict how decisions will be made and what will replace the anchor bias that was used before for these shortcuts to make sense of the world around them. So this is a bit what it looks like. You've got the brain here, and there's 3 major factors that can help persuade on anchor bias, and that's emotional health, that's social health, and physical health, right? Because the only thing that is going to become supreme to make sense of this world is fear of one of these things going wrong, right? Fear of loneliness, fear of being blind and unaware, and physical fear, right? Physical fear is always going to trump logic and will help make sense of the world, because if you can secure your own body, of course, you're going to be more likely to take that route because obviously it's self-preservational, right? So here we go. Here's what we see in the news to sort of get our minds around that, right? Here's what we see in the news in order to get around that. Well, first of all, when it comes to this awareness piece, right, you can already see these worlds colliding where people wouldn't have really gotten into a fight or even communicated before. It's going to happen more and more and more. And yesterday we had a really great quote from Michael Malice. So this was an academic. I found out where he's from. He's associate prof, GWU, I don't know, George Washington University, I guess, in DC. Author of 2 books, The Move On Effect and Analytic Activism. Tweeted that one Brett Stevens joke that one time. Don't know what he's talking about. Don't even know who Brett Stevens is. And of course, he's a him, he, his. He's a pronoun guy. So here's what the pronoun guy says. He starts giving advice, I guess, on what Elon should have done. And he says, the best case scenario is Elon realizes he has to wait out the tech crash if he has any chance of recovering his money and leaves things mostly as is. That would require a humility that I don't think he possesses. But maybe the price tag turns out to be sobering, parentheses, doubtful, right? So he's sort of like, this academic associate professor at George Washington University is, making his predictions on Twitter. And he says, I went ahead and spelled out my expectations for how the Twitter apocalypse will go down. Slowly at first, then an accelerating death spiral. So here's Michael Malice comes in, right? And he says, there's something beautiful about an academic opining how Elon Musk, the richest man on earth, doesn't understand how to invest his money, while simultaneously attacking his lack of humility. And then, of course, he reminds us that Twitter is so important, not because it's the public square, but because it allows elites to speak their minds, and in doing so demonstrates how the appropriate response toward them is utter contempt at the very least. This is an exact inversion of how they are presented in corporate media. So his point here is that Twitter is good because successful people talk and then the beans are spilled, but they're not magic, they're not royalty, they're not monarchs, they're just people like everyone else, and they can be just as dumb, right? And that's an awareness thing, right? That's an awareness thing. And when you start getting academics who have been coddled and allowed to voice their opinions on Twitter much more than the people who disagree with them. So as we know, the tables have been tilted this whole time, and we've never really seen the conflict. Therefore, awareness hasn't really grown, and there's an ability for all of these crazy ideas to sort of infect people's minds and set the agenda for the day. But when we see what Elon has done and the amount of people that are going to be gathering on all sides of this, you can start to see that the emotional piece, and we're gonna keep going to that because everyone was sort of pulling on that yesterday. We're gonna see how that continues to play a role. So yesterday, Elon came out and within this social sphere wrote a letter to advertisers, and I'll read it. He said, I wanted to reach out personally to share my motivation in acquiring Twitter. There has been much speculation about why I bought Twitter and what I think about advertising. Most of it has been wrong. The reason I acquired Twitter is because it is important to the future of civilization to have a common digital town square, where a wide range of beliefs can be debated in a healthy manner without resorting to violence. There is currently great danger that social media will splinter into far-right and far-left-wing echo chambers that generate more hate and divide our society. In the relentless pursuit of clicks, much of the traditional media has fueled and catered to those polarized extremes, as they believe that that is what brings in the money, but in doing so, the opportunity for dialogue is lost. That is why I bought Twitter. I didn't do it because it would be easy. I didn't do it to make more money. I did it to try to help humanity, whom I love. And I do so with humility, recognizing that failure in pursuing this goal, despite our best efforts, is a very real possibility. That said, Twitter obviously cannot become a free-for-all hellscape where anything can be said with no consequences. In addition to adhering to the laws of the land, our platform must be warm and welcoming to all, where you can choose your desired experience according to your preferences, just as you can choose, for example, to see movies or play video games ranging from all ages to mature. So what he's saying here basically is that they're going to allow people to participate in the platform more than before. And it is a for-profit business, so not everything is going to change, but it's not for the money, which I only sort of believe, because when you actually look at Twitter, it's much smaller than the other platforms. Facebook and a lot of them out there are way bigger. And the opportunity for growth on the side of Twitter is much higher as a result, right? It can keep growing. So from a purely economic point of view, that I'm a little suspect on, but it doesn't matter, right? The idea that he can buy it and make money off it shouldn't preclude it. I think what he's trying to do here is just show that the goal is not to make money. He's got enough. It's really about having active social activity on it, so that people have these, opportunities to learn, culture can be expressed, and all of those different things. So now we've got that letter, right? We've got the letter from Elon Musk that was published yesterday. Meanwhile, the president of Russia gave a speech yesterday, and it's related to this as well. So the president of Russia gave a speech yesterday, and Konstantin Kissin, who we've mentioned on this show before, we regularly take his translations because he speaks Russian. And he mentions at the beginning of every one of his translations that he opposes the war, is working for peace, and is not a supporter of Putin, Russia, or anything. I can make the same statement before I read his translation because, of course, I do not want Putin in charge of any country, including Russia. No country would do. Here I met with his main opposition before he was assassinated, Boris Nemtsov, and that left an impression on me about what's going on in Russia, and I don't think I'll ever change it. But nevertheless, I can at least listen to this fella. And so here's what he said, and this is a paraphrasement. So Konstantin Kissin does not transliterate what Putin says. He tries to gather the spirit and sort of tell the story of what he said in his piece. And so the most important fragment about the speech is this: the collapse of the Soviet Union destroyed the balance of forces. The West felt like a winner and proclaimed a unipolar world order in which only its will, culture, and interests had the right to exist. Now, this historical period of undivided Western dominance in world affairs is coming to an end. The unipolar world is becoming a thing of the past. We are standing at a historic milestone. Ahead of this most dangerous, unpredictable, and at the same time important decade since the end of the Second World War, the West is not capable of governing humanity alone, but it is desperately trying to do so. And most of the peoples of the world no longer want to put up with this. This is the main contradiction of the new era. In the words of the classics, the situation is, to a certain extent, revolutionary. The upper and lower classes do not want to live like this anymore. So he goes on and sort of gives this context that the West has lost the mandate to win. Now, the way I interpret that is, what we're really talking about here is this anchor effect, right? That basically the US system was the best choice for most people because it was available right there, and you didn't really have to go out of your anchor bias because it provided everything. Materially was the most successful system that has ever existed, right? On this show, we do not deny that the fiat system has been the world's most successful that we've ever known in the history of mankind at making the metrics that we should be following better, right? Infant mortality, disease, literacy, everything's going positive, right? We were an optimist before Bitcoin, right? I was anyway. I was an optimist before Bitcoin. Now, what Bitcoin allowed us to do is see that the path to this utopic world is not as far as we thought, right? Not as far as we thought. And now, if you look at the signs here, that this fiat system, its ability to use persuasion and to have anchor bias and to be the thing that people just choose because their mind is already made up, is coming to an end. And if you look at this emotional awareness that's about to be exposed from increased social activity, you see that there's an opening. And now, right, the way this sort of fog has worked is that if you don't allow groups to talk, your awareness is going to be low, right? And then the worst part of it with low awareness and poor social groups is you get lonely, sick, fearful people who are not healthy, right? Not physically healthy. Now, war does the same thing, right? Fear is much more powerful of a persuader than any amount of logic. Any argument I can make about infinity over 21 million is better than a Federal Reserve. We can't count the money. That's the logic side of the brain, right? If your system can no longer afford you security, well, that's much more persuasive, much more persuasive. And what Putin is basically saying here is that all of these pieces, right, are losing their ability to persuade, to get you to decide on something before it even happens. So Hollywood, we've talked a lot about on this show how Hollywood comes from this almost hypnotic, druidic tradition of a magic wand being made of Hollywood, and how these elements can actually help put a spell on people and convince them. You go into a theater, it's a dark room, and you come out often with a different feeling than you went in with, right? It's an amazing emotional hijacking vehicle and technology. But the thing is, it's losing its power. I mean, if you look at the most popular shows out today, everything from Marvel is getting criticized because it's following an agenda that doesn't really show much emotional awareness, right? It's following agendas that don't show much emotional awareness. You've got the Lord of the Rings that was a huge flop, right? Just a huge flop for Amazon. $1 billion or something they spent on the show, and they got no audience. Nobody watched it. It turned people away. So normally something like Lord of the Rings has this anchor bias, right? You buy a Star Wars movie ticket before the movie is even out. Well, they made an announcement this week about a new Star Wars movie, and it was just political infighting. Everybody laughed. No one's interested, right? Nobody's interested. And that goes for a ton of cultural properties. It's not just the big ones like Star Wars and comic book characters, right? It's starting to permeate all kinds of things. And once that happens, its anchors up, right? The anchors are up. And as we said, the worry, and this is how a Hitler does happen, right? That people will latch on to the first thing that comes to their mind in order to get peace and security and stability, in order to get emotional health, in order to get physical health, or in order to get social health, right? You'll latch on to the first thing. And that's where Hitler came from, right? Hitler showed that he was able to provide certainty in a time of hyperinflation, right? Never forget the hyperinflation of the Weimar Republic. I'm not the first one to state it, but the inflation and economic collapse of the Weimar Republic allowed the psychological opening for someone like Hitler to walk in the door, right? Because the anchor was gone. The anchor was gone. So Putin, in his speech yesterday, was more or less saying that the world, with this anchor, is now open. The anchor is out, and there's all kinds of countries that are open to a new form of persuasion. Putin, of course, is offering, oil, BRICS, commodity-based economic system that can help weigh against the energy-based system in the United States. And we've made lots of predictions here about energy. Well, here's one from yesterday. We've said that American oil companies are now the most powerful entities on earth. American energy companies, I shouldn't say oil, American energy companies. And this was in relation to the Nord Stream pipeline and who's controlling the military and things. So big oil third quarter earnings. ExxonMobil and Chevron reported combined net income of over $30 billion last quarter. For Exxon, it was the highest ever in its 152-year history. For Chevron, it was the second best quarter ever. Right, so the two large American energy companies had their best quarters in their history, right? Never before have they been that successful, never before. And, we've been saying for a long time now that American energy is the thing to go with, the thing to sort of follow, because it's becoming quickly the most powerful entity in the world. And if you think about that, right, you've got on the flip side, right, Bitcoin miners now. We see one of the big ones, Core Scientific, halted all debt financing payments yesterday, looking like there's a cash flow. But the good news is these companies that survive are going to be seen by American energy companies as great entities to partner with, right? Anyone who can survive what's going on now from a risk management, treasury management, all those points of view has a real opportunity to continue to work with American energy companies. So the door there is open, right? The door remains open, especially for what we can offer, which is savings and efficiencies and all that kind of stuff. I gotta. So let me. It's on YouTube. Oliver Stones. We're back. Anyone here saw Oliver Stones? It's on YouTube. So let me get this straight. One single unit has informed you in the. Sorry, Huru, I don't know which one you're talking about there. So Huru says, sorry, so let me get this straight. One single individual has informed you on the situation of an entire country. Just let me know what you mean, and I'll try to give some sense to it. So you've got all these, you know, people participating, competing, etc. Right? Now, physical security, right? How about this? Right, so we're talking about how things are opening up and becoming, you know, the anchor is gone and there's this new opportunity. Well, yesterday, buried deep in a 61-page report by the U.S. Attorney General, the Biden administration called for a dramatic expansion of the federal government's ability to seize and keep cryptocurrencies. If enacted, the proposed changes would bolster both criminal forfeiture, which requires a conviction to permanently confiscate property, that we understand, that's been around for a long time, but as well as civil forfeiture, which doesn't require a conviction or even criminal charges to be filed. So what they're going to do here is create a digital asset coordinator network. And it's a nationwide network staffed by more than 150 federal prosecutors trained on drafting civil and criminal forfeit actions. So they've got this new digital asset coordinators network that they're creating, right? And it should be able to seize and keep crypto, that's what they're saying, including Bitcoin. It says that they are going to be using kind of they're like the point person for each department, so like a point person for each department, and for each, you know, state even. And what they're going to do is, I think anyway, and I've called this for a long time, when they indicted Arthur Hayes in 2020, they put out basically a guidebook, right? It was a guidebook. And I read it was Bill Barr's DOJ. They put out a guidebook. And in the guidebook was every prosecution that's ever happened related to cryptocurrencies, everything that's ever happened. And it had the case law, it had the explanation of the case, the synopsis. It was really effective if you were interested in prosecuting, because you didn't have to do any more research. Everything was in the one document. And within the document, they included the Arthur Hayes indictment because it was a new thing. It was this exercising jurisdiction abroad and all kinds of things. So they had exactly what they did and the formula they used to get to Arthur. And so it looks like they're going to expand this whole situation now. And it looks like they've gone even further to mobilize this document that they created for Arthur. One can imagine that this previous DOJ document, 78 pages, works well with this digital asset coordinator network. So again, we've got now a type of physical security being threatened again by the state, right? So it's another one of those instances where you're talking about taking people's money and livelihood. You can do that if your persuasion and your anchor bias is as strong as it was in 1950s America, or even 1930s America when the original gold ban went into effect, right? You know, you had a super popular president at the time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, dealing with a public policy issue that was large enough to have near unanimous support. So the population didn't really mind the gold prohibition. And we were talking about the Wizard of Oz the other day, and how the Wizard of Oz was an analogy for the time that led up to the US abandoning the gold standard and becoming the hegemonic money in the world. And in that story, we talked about the straw man, the scarecrow, being this example of the modern, of the typical American rural person of the time who only sort of understood what was going on was wrong. But they knew it was wrong. They knew what the right thing to do would be, to take the shoes and walk on the gold brick path, the silver shoes on the gold brick path, silver on gold bimetallism. And so, at the time, the gold ban didn't have a Twitter, didn't have a Bitcoin Twitter, didn't have these P2P learning hubs, didn't have meetups, didn't have conferences, didn't have a whole subculture that was strong enough to oppose a gold ban. It had, Wall Street folks who had no popular support at the time because, of course, there was a massive depression, Wall Street crash, and most of the public was pretty much for whatever the government was going to do about gold and to the rich people, right? Because there was so much inequality at the time. So that was a really big change, and that whole piece, this new group, just adds to the anchor going up further. So here's the sort of summary of what I think can happen, right? You've got Putin, who said there's no more unipolar world. You've got Musk, who's behaving as an individual. And you've got America, who continues to assume everyone's got the anchor bias and is sort of pro U.S. institutions. Now, I'm pro-American like it's no one's business. Like I'm more pro-America than who's the most pro-American person we can think of? More than Donald Trump, right? Like I'm more pro-American than Donald Trump. I love America, love it, love it, love it, love it, warts and all. I love it. But the institutions themselves, terrible, right? I can love America without loving the US dollar. I can love America without caring about the DOJ, right? I love America. Like, it has nothing to do with institutions. It's the people, it's the land, it's the things that it's the platform it's given people in the world to make the world a better place is what I love about America. And just like Elon Musk from South Africa, who typical has come to America with all of his skills and talent and been able to make one of the most interesting lives that the world's ever known, right? No one's ever seen something this interesting and fun and whatever. So we've got this scenario now that anchors are up, right? That's a typical condition of a fourth turning, of a world war, right? That's what war feels like, anchors up, right? People don't really know how to make sense of what's going on. And with these different triggers that can help resupply certainty and cohesion and coherence, enter Satoshi, right? Enter Satoshi. So Satoshi, very different than American institutions with all their history, very different than Elon Musk with all of his personality, very different than Putin, right? There isn't much on the bone with Satoshi other than the invention and a few statements that seem universally coherent about what's going on and how much Bitcoin can change the world and make it a better place. And what we see here is the certainty, the psychological certainty of being able to count and see financial flows and understand capital efficiency and understand transactional nature of many parts of the world, but in a transparent way, not in a confusopoly way, right? We don't want any more Wall Street confusopoly. That's already what we're based on. Confusopoly of not being able to, even buy insurance anymore. It's impossible. It's so hard. Like, just basic things are hard, right? Because of the confusopoly. And that's leaving people physically endangered. That's leaving people emotionally unaware, socially isolated, and a little bit like what Putin says, right? That the ability for America to run the world in this way is at an end. And because of that, it is a competition now to fill people's minds with a new anchor. And as we mentioned yesterday in the show, there's sort of three parties in World War III. There's the Axis, the Allies, and the Ables. And Satoshi is the most able. It's the most able person out there. And because the liabilities of Satoshi are so few, right? We don't know enough to hate Satoshi. We know just enough to know that the ideas are useful and we can take them and we don't need anything more because the ideas were already shared. And because this anchor is up, we can start meeting people halfway, right? All right. So what did Huru say? The guy you interviewed, you said that interview gave you everything you need to know about Russia, not your words paraphrased. So I'm just wondering. Oh yeah, Huru, yeah, I've been to Russia. I took the Trans-Siberian through Russia years ago. I was in Novosibirsk, and I stayed at the Rossaya Hotel. And so, no, it wasn't just one interview that I knew what to think about Russia. I shouldn't say that. And it not even really an interview. It wasn't like a media interview. It was some private time. Boris Nemtsov was doing the media tour around the Pussy Riot times, and so that would have been 2012, I guess, 2012. And he was the prime minister under Yeltsin before Putin, and was worried he was going to get arrested. So he was doing sort of a tour of heads of state, and so he was, doing a tour of heads of state so that he had some help in case he got arrested. Well, in the end, he didn't get arrested. He was shot in the head, so he's dead. And right outside of the hotel I stayed at, and I was in Russia, by the way, right outside of it. So I'm no expert. I went through there. It was quite a long time ago now. Putin was only recently installed, in fact. I think he'd only been leader for 2 years. Didn't he take over on Millennium New Year's Day or something, if I remember correctly? So this was not long after that at all. And the hotel that I stayed in is gone now. It's taken away. It was an old Stalinist building. I think it was the largest hotel by land size in the world, and it was right in front of the Kremlin and the Y2K. Yeah. So that guy Boris Nemtsov came to Canada, and so what I mean is, now he had a political objective, but he showed us stuff. I mean, he could have been lying, but he showed us his own personal material, his own investigations, and by the way, I was also in Russia when they arrested Alex Kordakovsky in Novosibirsk, and I was around Novosibirsk at the time. And he's the fella they didn't take him. They didn't let him out of jail until they held the Olympics in Sochi, and he was one of the gas. I forget who he owned, which gas company he owned, but it was one of the ones that Putin wasn't able to get control of. So, that's Boris Nemtsov's whole presentation was on, just trying to prove that Putin was, in fact, the richest man in the world, and it was convincing to me anyway. So it was convincing. That's all I know. That's all I know about it. All right, team. I got to take a call on Friday mornings, so I can't go quite as long. Well, I'm glad the thing wasn't down for too long. Did I miss any stories today, guys? Any other news out there that I missed? Oh, the Section 230 stuff. Yeah, that's actually worth talking about for a second. So in the United States, there's this. Well, maybe I'll save that for another day because it's a bigger story and it's kind of just tacked on here. Oh yeah, well I guess I can do one other one too, just about this anchors up even in China. This is pretty interesting. So Zhang Guoli, who was the guy who apparently raped the tennis player Peng Shuai, he got a promotion. And that's not going over well in China. That's not going over well at all. So, Huru, has Ye remained silent for 3 days? There's maybe some fake news yesterday I saw on Ye, a little bit of fake news. Looks like Ye, a story went around that he tried to rush into like a crappy shoemaker in America, like a low-grade shoemaker, like a discount. You can buy them at inexpensive stores, not as high quality or as They're called Skechers. I don't even know if you can get them outside of America as you can most of our footwear, right? A lot of Nikes. So apparently he went into this like crappy shoemaker and I had to escort him out because it was, I don't know, it could be fake or real. I mean, I get what he's trying to do if he's trying to make like, because it's a really, like, I guess you could call it a populist shoe. Maybe. But apparently they escorted him out. All right, team.